Hello, I'm just adjusting a little bit here. I see I have one person on already. I apologize, we're a little bit late. I tried to go live outside. Alas, that was not possible. Hold on just one moment. My children have come in. Give me a sec. Henry, please pop a shirt on and go with your dad. We are being joined by everybody. Sorry, my children had already departed and they have come back. So give me just a sec. They're going to be leaving again in just a moment, and I'm going to post on Twitter that we're live now, and then we'll be into it. Give me just a moment.
Thank you.
All right. So we have one child parting. We have a dog who may pop in the frame. I apologize that we're a little off to a little bit of a late start, if we're 5 minutes late. I tried to live stream outside, but it turns out until you have 1,000, it sounds like followers on a YouTube channel, you are unable to do that. I thought I would try anyway since it's such a beautiful day. That did not happen. So you may hear the door open and close a few more times as folks go in and out. And I think it may just be you and me right now. Just making sure the Twitter posted. Nope, not just you and me. So this is life momming while doing everything else. So I had a bunch of suggestions for what we could do for town hall today to try and make it more topical. And I think that I'll probably proceed on having it be more topical after today. Today, I like to talk a few minutes about how we're getting into a world where policy differences are not about actual policy. They're about whether or not people have the right to exist and how inappropriate that is as a discourse. So I think that we do have a right to disagree on whether or not we like things about people. But when we talk about what the actual policy is, that right shouldn't live in a space where disagreement on how somebody lives or judging somebody on how they live is very different from making it illegal or prohibitive. People are starting to come on into the chat. So as you pop in, if you want to ask questions, if you want to change kind of the topic and flow of conversation, these are fairly fluid events. So I'll usually start with what I'm talking about. Right now, I'm talking about human rights, but we can move to other issues if that is what the viewers are interested in, because town halls are not really about me, they're about you. So for the folks that just came in, I was talking about how, as a matter of policy, we shouldn't be debating whether or not people are allowed to exist. That is a topic that shouldn't be debatable. And so right now, one of the things I've said on Twitter quite a few times, and I get a lot of grief for it, is saying things like women aren't full citizens. And we aren't. We never have been. We weren't included in the original Constitution. We aren't equal under a whole bunch of areas of the Constitution. There had been some, the ERA has passed but not been fully ratified. And in a bunch of areas in our amendments, it talks about that there's sort of equality there, but that's not realized in our law. So it's not just women, and I talk about women a lot. I don't mean to make that in any way exclusionary, but women are a very broad group. So if women are protected, then definitely LGBT are not going to be protected. Definitely, you're going to have problems with minorities, with immigrants, with different racial tensions, anybody who doesn't fit into the mold. If we're saying a full slightly over 50% of people in this country aren't real people, that's going to apply to much larger groups. So I'm going to use women to sort of shorthand it for a wide range of things, but do know that when I'm talking about like women not being recognized, those rights that I'm concerned with for women, they're also rights that are going to apply to, LGBTQIA plus. I've never figured out how to say that right. So somebody please find me and tell me how to say that right. Um, it's going to apply to minorities, any disadvantaged or disenfranchised group. They're going to be having the same struggles. And so when I shorthand it with women, a lot of the times, Twitter just has only so many characters for those counts, and you can only get so much into a tweet. But those are rights that belong to everyone. Human rights are everyone's rights. Women's rights are human rights. LGBTQ rights are human rights. Rights for different groups, they're human rights. These are rights that should apply to everyone, and we can't even apply them to a literal majority of the country with women. That's shocking. It is shocking we're living in a world where women aren't considered full citizens. Um, and it is astonishing to me to watch the law sort of creep to a place where it's not just the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, women aren't real people, but it's actually starting to slowly become codified in law. And part of why I stayed on this topic, I took a couple weeks and was doing some family time. Before that, I'd come on and talk about Roe. This is back sort of in the world of Roe, but this is bigger than Roe. We now have tension over whether or not, women who had the possibility of being able to be pregnant are allowed to cross state lines. That's horrifying. There are draft bills circulating, whether or not they're meant to be serious bills. They're so serious they shouldn't be draft bills, that are similar to the Fugitive Slave Act, that are applying to women and whether or not women have freedom of movement. And if we can't protect women, we're not going to be able to protect anybody else. We won't be able to protect people who are LGBTQIA. We will not be able to protect racial minorities. We won't be able to protect people with disabilities, which is a category that gets forgotten all the time. And I'm so sorry if I miss that. But again, when I'm talking about women generally in the context of today, I'm talking about just human rights and trying to shorthand that with anybody who could be subordinated, vulnerable, or part of a different group. So we are hitting a place where we talk about whether or not people are allowed to even exist. We're not even talking about just the rights, but whether or not they're allowed to exist. We've had sitting members of Congress talking about, just kind of mulling lightheartedly, whether or not people who are same sex should have the right to be able to be married to their partners. As if that's something that should in any way be entertained as a debatable topic, or whether women should be able to consider contraception, as if that's even something that we should consider as a debatable topic or any of their business. And, looping that back to Roe, what happens when you no longer have privacy, when you no longer have autonomy, when you no longer have sovereignty over your own personal being, and nobody else has extended that grace either, when we essentially vote by committee on the laws of who you're allowed to be, instead of saying that's a private domain and none of the government's business, we end up stripping rights from the vast majority of people in this country. And those things shouldn't be said in jest. I have a lot of tongue-in-cheek jokes. I'm a relationship mortician. I have a very dry sense of humor. We shouldn't have sitting members of Congress joking about whether or not people have the right to marry, people have the right to love, people have the right to exist, people have the right to be free from being murdered, either directly or by policy. And so there's a lot going on right now that we need to be paying attention to that is pretty terrifying. I've had a few more people join. If you have questions, if you want to talk about anything, if you want to redirect the conversation, town halls are not about me. They are about you. Feel free to drop something in the chat and I will address it. I feel like I've harped on this a lot in my tweets lately, and I feel like I've talked a lot about this in town halls both this year and in prior years. So I kind of want to move it to something else I'd like to talk to you about. And it's something that I've noticed that we do all the time. We keep looking for saviors that aren't us. And here is what I mean when I say that. We keep looking for the champion that fits the mold of what we think somebody in Congress should look like. Somebody who has a lot of money or is dressed very fancy or is always very formal and reserved and perfect in their speech, or somebody who's on those big commercials and somebody who's a big somebody. And I think the more time we spend looking for those people to represent us instead of looking for either people who are just like us or people who are way better versions of us, and what we look for hasn't been way better versions of us, the more time we do that, the longer it's gonna be before we have the ability to course correct. And we are on a course that is terminal. This is terminal for society. It's terminal for whether or not our planet can be habitable. It's terminal for whether or not it's a society that can continue to function. And so what I want to challenge everybody who's out there to do is, every time you see somebody talking about candidates that aren't viable because they're normal people, challenge that. Because the problem is we've gotten governance that doesn't include women predominantly, that doesn't include people who are, LGBTQIA, that doesn't include enough minorities, that doesn't include appropriate representation. And when we don't have a representative sample making our laws, what ends up happening is we get bad laws and we get these biased things, and we get to debate, listen to people debate and joke offhand as to whether or not different categories of people should be allowed to actually function as people. And that is incredibly, incredibly problematic. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. That is the best way I have found to run these so far. And if you have any suggestions on how to run these better, please let me know. I would like to improve town halls as much as I can. The dog, you cannot see because he's a little low, is joining us right now, so you may hear a little whining. I apologize. It is a very, very warm day. I'm very shiny. I'm shiny and warm myself. And the dog is certainly wanting to get as much attention as he can with this. So we need to be looking at creative solutions for how to get people who are, air quote, regular people in office. And I'm going to be working on that with my campaign in the coming weeks and months. You'll see a lot of that. You'll see a lot of me making suggestions on how to do little manageable steps that you can do to get us out of this place where we have sort of ridiculous, not representative representation. We're going to be spending a lot of time finding places where if you don't have money to contribute, there's ways to not just help this campaign, but any campaign that you think is viable and important. Yes, Josh Simpson says the planet's on fire. Literally, indeed it is. I will move to that in just a moment. Yeah, we'll be working on ways to get more like regular people in office, and I want that to apply to me, but I want it to apply to everyone. I do not think of myself as fancy. I happen to have a couple more degrees than most people. I happen to have studied law. I happen to really like, Post-its and reading through the treasure hunt that federal law is, but I've also been on budgets and am on a budget. I also spend a lot of time understanding how the system is problematic to us. I've worked retail, I've worked minimum wage, and we don't have people in office that are doing that. So let's work on getting some people into office who understand the constraints that are put on the folks who haven't been to the fanciest schools and who don't have the money and aren't independently wealthy and aren't, governing as a hobby. Or as a side hustle, or for the marvelous insider trading opportunities. So let me loop around to some of the questions. So the planet's literally on fire. Yes, climate change. If I were to pick probably the top 2 or 3 issues, they would be that we need to see all people as people. This is a huge problem, and that does feed into climate change. We've broken our planet, and if we don't fix it, we're screwed. And we're not going to see how broken it is until we see all the people. And those are probably the 2 big issues, but they're big, big issues. The climate change issue is, it's not going to be like, oh, we'll put a carbon cap on and then it'll be easy peasy and all fixed. it is going to be something that has its fingers in probably not 100% of our bills, but easily 75 to 80% of legislation is going to have stuff in it that addresses the climate. Same thing with seeing people as people. You know, that's voting rights, that's human rights, that's privacy. That is a huge bailiwick that we're talking about. I don't know how much more bold and direct our planet can be to tell us that we've really mucked it up, but Mother Nature is not being subtle anymore at all. And if anybody was at all slightly confused, you know, Europe's on fire, most of the most continents have some major wildfires going right now. It's pretty bad. We have lakes drying up. I got in my car today. It was 93, 94 degrees. That was delightful. It is something we have to address. And it's something that if the person who's running for office, Golden, is just kind of living in a status quo world where we can make little steps, or like Poliquin doesn't think that steps need to be made because there's just ever so much profit in not making any steps. Neither of those people will save us. Those men will not save us. They will not get us where we need to be. They will either pull us backwards or they will put us on a pace that is so slow that my children will be dead by 50. And that's not acceptable, probably before 50 at this point in time. So we definitely need to be dressing up. We definitely need to be having probably 70 to 80% of our bills are going to have climate pieces in them. It's going to be everything from finding ways to have better public transit to making sure we can get things to electrification as quickly as possible. Though that may short term not necessarily be much cleaner. As we develop cleaner electricity, it means a much faster and a much more rapid adaptation. And it's going to be a range of things. It's going to be things like, what do we do with the surfaces of our roadways? Can we use reflective surfaces or paint on roofs, or do green roofs as ways to do carbon sinks or reflect light? Can we look at how we do our roadways and find a way to capture solar as a part of our roadways? Can we look at what seaweed does if it's added into livestock feed, and what does that do for greenhouse reduction? There's some really interesting work being done on that. So it's literally just going to be a huge range of things that we're working on, you know, all the way over to cell phones that we go through once a year. How do we make those components so we're not degrading the planet as quickly? So it is a big topic. Josh didn't ask a specific question, but definitely something that's huge. And if your candidate is not talking about climate change in a meaningful way, in a way that is pushing legislation, not just saying, yeah, I'm in favor of that and we should probably do something. If they're not pushing and passionate about it, push on that candidate or get a new candidate. This is too big of a thing to worry about, and it's too big of a thing to punt if we aren't worrying about it enough. So thoughts on the war in Ukraine? That's hard for me. I try to be very clear that why I'm a little bit aloof on Ukraine. I have to presume that the people in Congress have access to classified information that I do not. Though I find it terrifying that Twitter seems to be more aware of how viruses work and kind of trends and things like COVID and monkeypox, I hope that our legislature has a better grasp on Ukraine than Twitter or social media or the regular news. I hope that they are making wise and judicious decisions with the classified information they have. I suspect, because I'm Gen X and I, you know, grew up most of my adult life with Putin in charge, but it's been a long enough time that I feel like I maybe have a grasp for how nefarious he can be. I also am old enough to recognize that when somebody gets taken out of office, they are not necessarily replaced with something better. So him becoming older and having health problems may not necessarily rectify this situation. I'm concerned with democracy globally. And I think that Ukraine very much is sort of the beginning of an existential fight for that. But I don't know the specifics enough because I don't have access to classified information. I don't like war. I don't like how much we're spending on war. I suspect that there is information that is classified that kind of shows a return on investment, that even though we're sending a lot of money over there, we might be avoiding a much larger cost later, which I sincerely hope is the case, but I don't have the access to the information. And so war is one of the places where you will see me tap dance is the wrong word. Say, admit and openly acknowledge that I'm not going to be one of those people that tries to rip down what Congress is doing because I acknowledge they have more information than I do. That said, we have a lot of wars that we should be putting an end to one way or the other. Some of them we're more involved in than others. Some of them we're involved in and we're not getting credit for. A lot of them are proxy wars. We have a lot of genocide that is going around the planet, and I am firmly anti-genocide. And I think that those are things that I would like to dig into, but we have so many policy issues and I have so little information that's classified that it's difficult for me to give any sort of measurable plan on. And one of the things I want you guys to look for when I talk about things, I talk about my candidacy, but I just talk about candidates generally because I'm a voter first. So things you should look for if you haven't really had a lot of experience looking for candidates, you need to look for candidates that acknowledge that there are places in which they don't have all the information. You know, I have a lot of information on climate change, but I'm not a climate change scientist. So there's going to be places where I have to tap in. I have some information on Ukraine, not an extraordinary amount. I have in college had several colleagues that were Ukrainian and have talked about some of the geopolitical issues over there, but not enough that I would be a specialist or call myself a specialist. Look for people that acknowledge the boundaries to their knowledge and that they have, and the boundaries to the knowledge that they can get access to. So sometimes you'll hear me talk about classified information. So sorry if you can hear my dog whining in the background. He is just tragically upset that he is not getting extra cuddles right now. And then, so, you know, some things I don't have access to, like classified information, and some things I don't have access to that are important to be able to make policy decisions, like CBO scoring. You'll hear me talk about CBO scoring sometimes. So a few times in these events, I'll put like little Post-its where I'm giving you a sidebar. Make sure that when you're looking for candidates, they can acknowledge in a healthy and truthful way the boundaries of the information that they're going to have access to. Okay, energy source, how economic models are changing money. Yes. So I'm getting a lot from Josh here. So I agree with Josh. So Josh's comments, if you're unable to read them, especially for folks who are joining us but are vision impaired, it says, energy source, how change how economic models are making money into green or something can help sustain human beings while reducing burdens on Earth. The biggest issue is Congress itself. There are not enough representatives that understand that comprehensively and wholesomely understand without removing their cultural bias and open up to other lived experiences. And so many in Congress lost their connection to humanity that we need to return human beings back to humanity more than ever, and true empathy and understanding to others. Yeah, I agree with that. And that ties back to those two issues. The two biggest issues we have right now, climate change, existential. If you don't have a habitable planet, no politics matter. And we just don't treat people like people, whether it's, you know, migrants coming across the border, seeking asylum. And boy, a lot of people are judgy on that, but that could be us if we're not taking good care of things. So, you know, glass houses, stones on that one. Or seeing that women have humanity, that we make difficult decisions, thinking that we can make decisions on other people's lives and how, you know, they should do it our way because our way is better. These are all tied together. And those are kind of the two biggest problems we have. I get asked a lot of times, you know, voters' rights. Well, voters' rights are part of human rights. We need to address climate change, and we need to treat people like people. So those are probably my biggest priorities. I often will say it in, you know, it's not that hard to not be a jerk, because those are the two areas we really need to focus on. There are certainly other areas. You can certainly break those areas down into 50 different components of things that are important, that are subvariants. But those are definitely two big issues that we need to worry about. Gary, I hope I answered your questions on Ukraine. I apologize that I don't have something more specific, by the way. I'm just responding to some of the comments that are in here. I wish I had more information to provide you, and I suspect if we don't have the information, it's because it would be detrimental for us to have it. I know that Josh is very passionate about the environment. We've interacted on that, and I know a lot of my followers generally are very passionate about that. I want to make sure that we're getting more focused and more productive with the town halls as they go on. So I expect these will start pretty small. We've had like 10-ish people, which, you know, it's not bad for where we are on a 90-something degree day in Maine and warmer in many other places. As we get closer to the election, we'll get more focused. We'll have more people. We'll have more specific questions. We'll have more of an agenda. This is the first of the series that's going to be going for a while. Forgive me, my dog is very excited. And I think part of the whining is our next door neighbors also have a dog. And I think that he is wanting to play with the next door neighbor's dog, but he can wait. So yeah, we'll be getting more focused. We'll be getting topical. This particular Tuesday night event, unless there is a conflict with some other event that takes priority, is going to be almost every Tuesday at 7. There may be a few where there's a forum or a debate or something that it needs to get preempted. And then Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Oh, so early. It's going to be more casual. That's probably never going to be particularly formatted, and that'll just be back and forth Q&A. Please tell your friends, tell your neighbors if they want to interact. There is that opportunity. I don't see any more questions. We've been going for about a half an hour. The dog is very excited about the neighbors, and somebody is knocking at my door. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email, or I'll see you next Tuesday.